Right, ladies and gentlemen, a packed program lined up for today. So what I'd like to do next is move straight into our panel discussion. We're looking at the evolution of the South African payment system from PASA's perspective, obviously. And just a bit of a preamble, if I may, before we go into the actual panel itself. You know, as we've heard mentioned on stage already, 20 years of PASA so far. PASA formally established on the 26th of September, 20 years ago, and was subsequently recognized in June of 1999 as the payment system management body in terms of the NPS Act that was promulgated also in 1998. So, in terms of industry collaboration, what do we have with us today? Not only you, ladies and gentlemen, comprising the essence of the payment industry in its own regard, but also both on stage and off. I'm delighted to tell you we have a couple of the legends of the payment systems industry with us as well. Clearly, we'd have loved to have called upon everybody who played a significant role throughout those 20 years to the stage, but there are so many heroes in this particular story, there isn't time to call them all up. But what I'd love to do now in our session, which leads us up to the tea break, is to help put the story together of how the payment system and PASA systematically and specifically evolved. So I do have a panel member session coming up, and what I'd like to do is call them up to the stage so that we can welcome them and perhaps put one or two questions and a bit of history and a bit of nostalgia in here as well as a sense of future. First and foremost, ladies and gentlemen, I'm delighted to tell you that all the way from Switzerland, keeping up with our international connotation as well, Philip Trump is back with us here in South Africa. Philip, if I can ask you to join us on stage as well, if you would, sir. We're in a situation where we're going to ask Philip a couple of questions, as well as the other panel members coming forward. Let me give you a bit of an intro on Philip, if you're new to the industry, obviously because he's a legend. He carved out his experience across central banking, information technology, infrastructure development across financial payment and settlement systems, group process facilitation. Have a seat, sir. This is going to take a while. Nice to have you with us. We'll applaud in a moment, I guess. Corporate governance, executive management, and initially in the central bank, Philip's work was focused on establishing a sound national micro and macroeconomic database for economic analysis, research purposes across South Africa. In the latter years of his banking career, he was focused on IT management and the modernization of the South African national payment system, which resulted in a world-class real-time interbank settlement system environment and had a marked impact on all of our South African financial infrastructure, opening up opportunities for banks, for service providers, and professional payment service managers across stakeholder institutions. Since 1999, he's been with Parago Financial Systems. He stepped down as CEO there in 2009. But my goodness, what a legend in the industry as well. A pleasure to have you with us. Can we give him a warm round of applause, please, if we may? Questions in a moment for you, sir. Thank you. Let's just bring up a couple of other panel members as well. Dr. Alwyn Berger, the PASA Council Chairman and Independent Advisor, whose career in banking started back in 1979. Would you believe he was a statistician at UBS? Originally, way back in his career. Come and join us as well on stage, sir. In the ABSA merger of 1993, he ended up fulfilling several executive positions as a group executive director on the main board, and he was responsible for all of ABSA's commercial bank infrastructure and IT. He joined Standard Bank in 2001, had many roles over the years, including Chief Operating Officer of Standard Bank Africa and the Global Chief Technology Officer as well. Before his retirement, he focused on the rest of Africa's operating units and was looking with a key focus to develop a low-cost banking capability for PBB Africa. He's also been Regional Managing Director of Standard Bank Namibia, served on more boards than I can tell you about. But how's this? Probably the best accolade. Recognized for his contribution over the years to the ICT industry. He was recognized in 2003, the first recipient ever in South Africa of the ICT Leader of the Year. Alwyn, we're delighted to have you with us as well, sir. Let's give him a round of applause too, as well, if we may. Thank you. Next up, joining us on stage, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to ask Walter to come back to the stage. You can only escape for a certain number of hours, Walter, is all. We all know about your legend, so come up and take a seat. Let's give Walter another round of applause, please, if we may. And last but not least, Tim Masella is joining us. Tim, from the South African Reserve Bank, was appointed as the head of the National Payment System Department in August of 2012, having joined the bank in July of 1994. He represents the bank on the International Settlements Committee, on the Payment and Market Infrastructure, as well as the Continuous Linked Settlement Oversight Committee, chaired by the Federal Reserve Bank of New York. Tim, delighted to have you with us as well. Welcome to the stage, sir. Let's give Tim a round of applause, please, if we may. Right, terrific. So lots of people to talk to here on the panel. Lots of expertise, ladies and gentlemen. This is the 20-year history of PASA. Let's go back a little bit, and perhaps, Philip, if I may, I'd start with you, sir. Most of the payment system, as we know it, started, as we've heard, under your leadership. Let's go back and look at some of those early days. What are the major recollections that you have, Philip?
Is this thing working?
Yeah, just hold it nice and close.
Thank you very much for the kind introduction. I didn't really recognize the person you were talking about, but thank you very much.
You must look in the mirror more often, sir. You're a living legend.
It's actually lovely to be here. It was a long trip yesterday to get here, just over 10,000 kilometers, but I must tell you the last 20 was the most difficult. And I'm very glad I actually got here. The Reserve Bank, as all central banks, have been in the payment system since the beginning. Of course, with cash.
Yeah.
And over time, they also got involved in checks and check clearing. And part of the Reserve Bank Act is the role of facilitating the effective payment system in the country and also ensuring end-of-day settlement. So the bank has always been there. But with the evolution of the payment systems and the automation, the bank really took a back seat and allowed the banks to go forward with the payment system and make it their own. And I think that development served South Africa well. Our banks did a very good job. But when we re-entered the economy of the world, in 1993, 92, 93, thereabouts, there was concern about systemic risk. And with this wonderful clearing and settlement environment that we have in the country, would that be safe and sound as we enter into the global payment space? And the Reserve Bank, under the leadership of Roy Bamber, one of our old colleagues, he tried very hard to get the banks to accept the responsibility for risk.
Yes.
And to introduce measures that would mitigate the risk of the system not being able to settle at the end of the day. And after a year or two, the Reserve Bank became a little frustrated with the efforts of the banks, and the governor at the time, Dr. Chris Stals, decided that the Reserve Bank should play a strong hand in this and take the responsibility on behalf of the industry to make a change. Now, he looked around the bank for a sucker to give this responsibility to, and he decided that the IT guy is the man who should run with this. So my knowledge of payment systems at the time was very limited, and the only way that I could think of making a success of this was to follow a collaborative approach. And we invited the banks to nominate individuals who could work on this project with us. And we started from the very beginning with a collaboration between the banks and the central banks. The banks actually found it quite strange, and maybe you can comment on that, that the Reserve Bank would adopt this collaborative approach, because we used to be more authoritarian and dictate exactly what the banks will do.
Absolutely.
So they were very suspicious of this initiative and wanted to know what we're really trying to achieve here. But nevertheless, we decided to adopt a strategic approach. In other words, we decided we'll take a 10 years view. We'll look at the situation 10 years from that point in time, which was 1993-94, and what would be ideal for South Africa. that actually worked very, very well because that took away a lot of the concerns of the banks, the competitive issues. You know, guys were nearing retirement, so didn't care too much about what will happen to the bank in 10 years' time. It was not an incremental, let's fix the problems of today now. It was what will our children and our, you know, what will they experience? And that worked very, very well, actually. And the collaboration of the banks was really dedicated, and we produced what became known as a Blue Book, which was the South African National Payment System Framework and Strategy document. And that was authorized by the governor in 1995, together with the head of the, was it the Bankers Association at the time? Or is it now the Bankers Association?
The Council of Southern African Bankers back then, in those days.
Yes. Clearing Bankers Association. So that was signed off as South Africa's strategy to reform the national payment system. And I think that set the whole ball in motion to go forward as an industry.
Now, if I go back and look at what that Blue Book, as it became known, gave strategic direction across systemic risk mitigation, self-regulation, direct participation of all banks, non-bank participants, cost efficiencies and access to all South Africans with banking. And it was giving effect to self-regulation, and I guess really it was the birth also then of the payment stream associations and everything that rolled on beyond that as well.
Yes, well, part of the exercise was to not only give an indication of the future, but to also give the roles and the responsibilities on how that would be achieved, and also what was negotiable and what was non-negotiable. And in order to foster participation in the payment system, what we wanted to achieve was to have the people who offer certain instruments to work in a collaborative way in taking that payment instrument forward. And I think there the whole idea of so-called payment stream associations, as it was called then, came about. And once we had defined that role, where banks would participate in the payment stream associations in which they are active, so that you can have only two banks operating in a certain specific instrument, for example. The umbrella body to look after all these payment stream associations and to dictate policy and rules, etc., that go across streams, that is where PASA actually came into the picture.
Looking back now, it sounds incredibly easy to talk about it in the 3 or 4 minutes that we've done so. Clarifying one or two things for me. Where do you think that we got it right?
Yes, I think the fact that we took a collaborative approach and a strategic approach was fundamental to the success of the venture. But the introduction of South Africa's real-time gross settlement system was, I think, a major achievement. The so-called SAMOS system. SAMOS actually stands for the South African Multiple Option Settlement System, typically an IT acronym. We love to do that. But it was really a multiple option system in the sense that it catered for gross and net settlement methodologies within the same system.
And it was a global first, wasn't it?
It was a global first, yes. The issue of netting versus gross was a big story in the 90s. The banks were concerned worldwide that real-time gross settlement would impact on their liquidity and that they will not be able to cope. And the South African banks in particular took a very hard line that they wanted netting and not gross.
Yes.
So over time, I think the acceptance came that we needed real-time gross settlement. In other words, that transactions are executed immediately, intraday, with final and irrevocable settlement. That's what RTGS systems are all about.
Was it as scary as blockchain is today back then?
I think we have our buzzwords which put the non-included off. So that was quite scary. But in the end, the system that was produced enabled the banks to do real-time transfers, which was fantastic, and also to do netting arrangements that would still identify the transactions on a one-by-one basis, but would settle with the minimum liquidity required. So from that point onwards, everybody was happy, the banks were supportive, and the process went forward.
You're being a trifle modest with it as well, sir, because the Blue Book, as it's now known, became the international standard for payment system reform around the world and was endorsed by the World Bank. This was a banking industry initiative that showed how really effective collaboration can be achieved between regulators and industry competitors. Looking back now thinking of it in those terms, does that make you feel a bit proud, sir?
Yeah, it definitely makes me feel very proud. I think the World Bank has a department that works in the developing economies to promote effective payment system and specifically payment system reform. And they, without our permission, took the South African methodology and have presented that to the global economy as the way to do these things, the way for countries to modernize their payments environment. We were involved in a number of workshops with the World Bank, where they had the developing economies in a sort of a training environment where we helped them to understand this process.
Fantastic. Don't you think that deserves a round of applause, ladies and gentlemen? That truly is. Let's pass the baton, so to speak, if we may, to Alvin, who's been in the financial services and payments industry for a long, long time. How long? He can remember helping install the very first ATM. Is that fair, sir? Tell us about your first exposure to payments, Alvin, if you will.
Thanks for the opportunity. I think my first experience with payments really started with the whole ATM saga in the country. I started life in banking in UBS, United Building Society, and it was the biggest building society at the time. And if you go look at the early 80s, I mean, there's a whole history of payment developments before PASA and before the era which Philip has described, and that's really what I want to focus quickly on. So, building societies at the time weren't allowed to issue unsecured credit. We could only issue secured credit with a home loan. So, banks launched checks and credit cards. I think Barclays at the time, which is a different Barclays from today, old FNB, or what became FNB, launched credit cards with Visa. Subsequently, Standard Bank came with MasterCard, but they had the credit cards, they had the check in the pocket, which consumers could use to pay for goods. And building societies couldn't compete, so we needed to find a way to compete. So we launched ATMs. All the building societies were very early into the ATM cycle because we needed a strategic answer to the payments in the pocket, which was cash. So you could draw cash around the corner from an ATM. And of course, it also gave cost reduction. That was a really interesting play because, as you know, I mean, the guys always said the ATM hasn't got a mother and a father, so it'll work 24 hours a day.
I love it.
Started a consumer service to customers. The first ATM had one line in 40 characters, yellow dot matrix screen. And a couple of years later, there came an IBM 3624, which was 6 lines by 40 characters. And I was running the programming section that time, and it took one of our programs 3 months to program the cursor movement on the screen. 3 full months.
What?
So if you think today, you know, we swipe and we point, that was 3 months. But then came a collaboration between 4 organizations that was running IBM mainframe technology, which was UBS and Standard Bank, a bank called Volkskas, and Post Office. And because we were running the same IBM technology, we could basically couple the 4 machines bilaterally together with a channel extension called inter-systems coupling. And hence Multinet was born, which is ATM sharing between the 4 of us. This was about 1983, 84. 85, 86 came SASWITCH, which was all the banks getting together and launching a service which included all the banks. And that's really where you saw the first collaboration of interoperability. We didn't have standard cards, so it was a massive mechanism to write code which would take all the cards of all the banks.
Yes.
But suddenly you had a mechanism where all customers could go to any ATM in the country and get cash. So that led up to the convenient ATM service that we got today. Was very early in the life cycle of ATMs. And other examples are, for instance, the Speed Point, which was originally originated by a guy called Gerard Maynard in a little company that he ran called Natec, which was subsequently sold to ICL, which FNB, Barclays at the time, launched to put out a large amount of connected point of sale machines. All the banks followed that. So that enabled the launch of eventually of the debit cards and the credit operations that we see today. You know, we had a retailer launch PayNet, which was a mechanism for debit cards, which wasn't similar. It wasn't Maestro or Electron like we had from the card schemes, but it was directly connected to the banks. They had negative interchange, which caused us years of negotiation to get that sorted out. But if you really look at what the visionary called Chris Hurst, which was the FD from Pick n Pay, had to launch debit cards in the country, huge contribution. And so it can go on. So once we, and I think the other big thing that changed in the country was the demise of building societies. The building societies became banks. UBS went on to become ABSA. SA Permanent Building Society went into Nedbank. NBS went into FNB, etc. And we were running something called the Building Societies Data Bureau, which Hendrik will remember because he ran that for a while. And we had ACB from the banks. And so we had two clubs, Building Society Club and a bank club. And a guy called Rod Hyde from Standard Bank had the foresight to come and talk to me. I was chairman of BDB at the time, he was chairman of ACB, and we decided to merge. And that eventually led to the same group of bank executives sitting around the payment businesses called SASWITCH SBV, which, by the way, the cash business stands for Standard Barclays and Volkskas. That's where the name comes from.
Oh, wow.
SASWITCH BankScan, which handled all the paper slips from credit cards, Joint Banks Credit Bureau, JBCB, Unixcore, CD. We had all these same guys sitting on the boards of all of these, and we had to look at it and saying, well, we got to find a more efficient way. And eventually we had all the board meetings on the same day with different agendas. And eventually we said, to hell with that, let's put it all together. And hence BankServe was born. So I think my point is a huge amount of people gave a lot of input and a lot of foresight, and that created, I think, a interoperable infrastructure which enabled a lot of the payments capability we got today.
So with all that collaboration and BankServe emerging, that was really helping the payment capabilities across South Africa develop. And as a result of that, without it, there probably wouldn't have been a PASA.
Well, we had the makings of a national operator,
Yeah.
Which is necessary infrastructure for the regulation to run on. And we had, as Philip has said, a collaborative approach, an inclusive approach. I think we had a really hard time of getting everybody together. I mean, getting the banks and SARB to agree was quite an effort. We had a great team from the banks working, and I think a great team from SARB working on it, and we had patience on both sides. And that eventually created the platform for what led to the Blue Book.
So how did you get involved then in PASA originally, sir?
I was chairman of the CBA, the Clearing Bankers Association, so that was a natural discussion portal for Philip to start working with. So out of that, I was very involved with the negotiations and the many meetings that we had with the banking team. And out of that team, we had guys like Johnny Pina from ABSA and Mike Lear from Standard Bank, and Peter Rawlings from FNB, etc. All these guys had a tremendous contribution.
Now, talking about Mike Lear, unfortunately he can't be with us here today, ladies and gentlemen. Sends his regards, but as the first chairman, we got hold of Mike Lear and asked him just one or two things about the historical connotation of this session this morning. And he said to us, I recall my excitement and sense of honor when I was first approached on behalf of the banks, he was at Standard Bank at the time, to establish and direct the PASA office. On my first day, I looked at the new domain that I had, discovered a front door, a couple of desks, a secretary, and a telephone extension that was only connected to the switchboard of the Banking Council. But really an outstanding role that he played. Countless meetings, as you've heard, back in those days, going through the clearing protocols, the parameters, looking at ways to modify and suggest laws, regulatory demands, convincing the banks in those early days 20 years ago that they weren't losing their independence nor their competitiveness by collaborating on payment strategies, which is quite remarkable as well. And at this point, what I would have done with the panel, ladies and gentlemen, is I would have introduced you at the stage to Dave Mitchell, who I'm sure many of you know as well, the former head of the National Payment Systems Department at the South African Reserve Board. Sadly, Dave has got very, very, very serious bronchitis. He would have done anything to come here, but he was under strict doctor's orders not to. But he said to me, please just give me a few words, if you will, say them for me, Michael. So allow me to speak on behalf of Mr. Mitchell, if I may, gentlemen. He said that his introduction to PASA came very abruptly in March 1999, when a whole bunch of people, including his then boss, Philip over here, decided to leave the Reserve Bank to establish their own company. He said, working on that Blue Book scenario, looking at the Samos RTGS systems that went live in 1998, he claims that he wasn't involved really in those processes, other than, a small thing, to develop the South African Reserve Bank Link Network, or the SARB Link Network, which was an alternative to SWIFT in those earlier days for smaller banks as well. When Philip and his colleagues left the Reserve Bank, he said it created a lot of discomfort for the then governors of the bank. And Dave remembers attending a meeting in March of 1999, a SADC IT forum in Centurion, when he got a call from the deputy governor of the Reserve Bank then, Dr. De Swart, who promptly informed him that he had to take up an appointment as the head of the NPS division, and he better get back to the bank immediately. Within all of it, somebody said, by the way, would you attend this PASA Council meeting on Monday? And he said, what is it? I have no idea. Shows how much he knew, says Dave. He was called in on Monday morning into Dr. De Swart's office and handed a letter that said, by the way, you're about to become the chairman of the council. The meeting starts in 10 minutes' time. And said, oh, and you can't speak on behalf of the Reserve Bank either. Kind of a remarkable history when you go back and think about it. And going back into that stuff as well, you mentioned Mike Lear, who's not here either. He mentioned that his time at PASA was the build-up to signing the first EFT debit payment instructions, or the PCH agreement. He noted with pride, said Mike, that by the time of his retirement, the full suite of PCH agreements at that time had been completed as well. And then when Mike retired, Hendrik Pelser, good old colleagues, Hendrik was appointed Chief Operating Officer of PASA. Is Hendrik with us today? There he is, sitting in the front row. Let's just acknowledge Hendrik. Let's give him a round of applause. Unlike some of his colleagues, still actively involved as well, by the way. Well done, Hendrik, at that level. Serving as a council member as well, so that's brilliant. And when we chatted a little earlier, Hendrik said he remembers working on the world first, proudly South African early debit order, or EDO payment system as well. And that solved the problem of collections of loan repayments for consumers to micro-lenders, accommodating card and PIN authentication as well as manual approval. So a lot of cool stuff going on there, and thank you for your involvement, Hendrik, as well. Johnny Pina, I'm not sure if Johnny's with us today. Where is he? I can't see him.
To the left. There we go.
Thank you very much. Give us a wave, Johnny. Thank you, sir. Lovely to have you with us. Then appointed afterwards as the Chief Operating Officer of the PASA Association as well, and played the very important role of change agent at the time of PASA's first restructuring and its journey to incorporate payment systems strategy into the EXO office. And Johnny's active participation in that payment system continues today. He's also involved in the PSSF, Payment Systems Stakeholder Forum, and a new system to ensure authentication for early debit orders. Brilliant, that. Well done indeed. So, Walter, looking at your colleagues and thinking about what's gone before you as well, you've also been involved with PASA a long time prior to your appointment as our Chief Executive, sir. How did it all start for you?
I must admit, I'm probably a little bit of a latecomer in the whole process, if I listen to Olwe and Johnny and the rest. I only got involved, I think, at the sort of 99, 2000. My first introduction to PASA was when I was pulled into a PCH meeting. It wasn't actually a PCH meeting. I think a group of guys were getting together to try and establish a card PCH. And they wanted to sort of develop the rules of the game. And they pulled me in as one of the card experts. So I was already involved in payments at ABSA, but I had never heard of PASA, or I heard of PASA, but Johnny was really running the show at ABSA in those days in terms of PASA. So I was pulled in. That was my first introduction. And I must say, I think if I think of the history of the payments in South Africa, what really made it different to many other countries that I have contact with is the visionary leadership that we had from very early on.
Yeah.
That set a very solid foundation, I think, first of all, and then also really, I think the sense of vision and cooperation, I think, is still there to a large extent. And that really set the groundwork for our payment system that we know today, which is still one of the best in the world. And I think there's many, many proud achievements that we can look back to. One of the, I think, challenges we had in those days was the card industry was sort of separate for a while. It was sort of running parallel to the PASA guys that had established the EFT services earlier on. There was an association called the Association of Bank Card Issuers and Acquirers, the ABCI, which functioned very well, but was probably bordering a little bit on a collusive environment because they even set interchange and all kinds of stuff in those days. So it was quite a trick to try and get them involved in the PASA domain, but obviously the legal framework was on the side of PASA and the NPS Act. And so eventually the card guys were incorporated as the card PCH. I eventually got involved in PASA Council, I think from about 2000. But one of the missing pieces in those days was that PASA did not do strategy. So they did sort of the regulation, the rules, all those kind of things, but they did not do strategy. So I think a lot of the innovations took place at BankServe. In fact, the BankServe board, I think in Aldain's days, often, at the board meeting would decide what new innovations to adopt. But with the competitions inquiry in those days, BankServe's role fundamentally changed. So one of the problems that we had, that I saw in those days, that we had no real-time EFT system. Everything was batch-driven. And I had no platform in which to initiate this. So what I did at that stage, I phoned Brian Lazar at Standard Bank and asked Brian if he would be interested in talking about a possible real-time clearing service. And he said yes, and we called everybody else together and said, look, Absa and Standard Bank are going to do this. If you guys are interested, you're welcome to join the club. And that's how we actually started the RTC initiative, which ended up being the very first retail real-time payments service for EFT in the world. 2006 is when we launched it, almost in parallel when EDA was happening, sort of at the same time frame. But I think one of the developments out of that, we just realized the need for a strategic platform, strategic development platform, because PASA didn't see that as part of their mandate in those days. We actually created a separate organization, a payment strategy organization. We appointed our own CEO at that stage, but he resigned after 6 months and went back into the medical aid industry. And then that was pulled into the Banking Association as a division of the Banking Association called PayStrat. So for a while, I think, in my view, PASA lost a bit of track because they didn't embrace the whole payments environment. And it was only after I was approached to become CEO in March 2008 that one of my preconditions for doing this was that strategy has to be part of the mandate. And we had some serious negotiations at that stage. Obviously, it was Cascavadi at the Banking Association who had to give up payment strategy. There was Michael Jordan, who was the chairman of the operations board at the association, and Dave Mitchell were part of the group that discussed this with me, and eventually we got permission to pull the strategy function back.
And that was supported by the Reserve Bank as well.
Dave Mitchell was a strong supporter. I think he never believed that the operational risk management, rule-making part and the strategy should be separate. So he strongly supported that. And so eventually, when I started as CEO, we brought strategy and rule-making back together.
As well as King 3, which has been under your watch as well.
Yeah, I think King 3 was a major theme that we had to look at as well. Obviously, we had to look at building a different organization, bringing in strategy. We had to create strategy forums. And then King 3 as well, we had to start re-looking at our governance, and the whole issue of independent council members started coming up. But we agreed then very early on we want to bring on board an independent chair. And that was a long journey in itself. It took many years. It was quite difficult, I think, for the councillors to agree to open up to non-bankers. And I think that challenge still lies ahead of us to some extent. But eventually, after a short list of something like 63 people, we came down to the obvious choice of first independent chair, which was obviously Dr. Alwyn Burger, which we're very glad to get on board. So Alwyn came on board in March of last year, and obviously, as things worked out, he was the first chair, I think, originally of PASA as a bank councillor.
Yep.
And then after he retired, a few years after he retired, Alwyn could come back as an independent chair, but with the benefit of having all this experience and history of him. So I think it was a great combination to have an independent, but somebody that understood payment systems and that the bankers could trust. So it was a good transitional arrangement.
What are the other key things that stand out for you in your 8-year tenure so far, sir?
I think the engagement with the non-banks was also a really key development. So apart from the two strategy forums, the payments landscape had already changed considerably by then. So we'd started licensing so-called system operators. At this stage, we've got close to 90 of those. So non-bank infrastructure providers started becoming a prominent part of the payment system. And then, obviously, I think what really triggered it for us was the introduction of chip card technology, EMV so-called, of which South Africa was also a very early adopter. And we realized that the banks couldn't push this onto the retailer community because they needed to invest quite a lot of money in upgrading their terminals. So we approached some of the major retailers, and I think it was Chris Hurst as well, who Alwyn mentioned earlier. He'd formed SAPIF, which was the Retailers Association, and we started having regular meetings with them. And out of that was born the Card Stakeholder Forum. So that was the first formal forum that PASA created in which we could engage with the retailers as a payments industry to major retailers. And that really served us very, very well to be able to introduce new innovations in a collaborative way. Not trying to do it on a forced way, but I think very soon we got the support of the retailers through SAPIF, and it served also to serve as a pattern for the so-called electronic paper and cash stakeholder forum, which was later created, which was more focused on the EFT side. So I think those two platforms
out.
engage really, I think, are some of the things that stand out.
There's also the establishment of the PASA project office as well.
Yes, absolutely. I think
Resultant risk and compliance functions being developed and all that stuff that's come through there.
yeah, very much so. I think the professionalization of project management in PASA is a really key development. Up to that stage, we implemented things on a sort of ad hoc, amateurish way, but we've established a professional project management office with professional project managers, and the discipline of doing that on an industry basis is absolutely crucial to our success going forward. So there are quite a number of those kind of initiatives which I think helps to professionalize PASA, formalize things, and in this modern world you have to do things.
And of course, you're the first CEO to accept a modern democratic vote and run 2-year conferences.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Something that the future holds for us as well. I mean, are you looking forward to your future as well?
Yeah, I think, the Deputy Governor set the scene as well. So we're now 20 years later, 2 decades is a long time in payments. And looking forward to the future, I think the Reserve Bank's timing of reviewing the PASA role, well, first of all, deciding whether the fundamental role should change or not, because the Reserve Bank can do things on their own. They don't legally require PASA. However, I think the model has worked and the foundation was set through the Blue Book and the collaboration that started there. I really think we've got a great model of having a good, knowledgeable regulator, and I think the role of the National Payment Systems Department is crucial to that.
Thank you so much. That gives me a brilliant segue across to Tim. Mr. Basela, in terms of your view, sir, from a Reserve Bank point of view, listening to those recent developments, I mean, you're aware of them anyway over the years. How are they shaping and influencing your own thoughts around PASA, and what do you think the future holds for it, sir?
Okay, thanks. First, I'll
Just nice and close, if you will.
First, I'll start off by also indicating that I associate with the successes and contributions that PASA has made in the development of our national payment system. And I actually recognize the contribution of my fellow panelists on the stage, as well as colleagues in this conference that contributed to those successes. I'll just start off by also indicating that, yes, as indicated earlier on, the Payment Association of South Africa was recognized by the bank in terms of the NPS Act in June 1999. And as colleagues will recognize from this, the bank delegated some responsibility to PASA, but retained the accountability for anything going wrong. And in this regard, I would like to believe that things have went pretty well. We achieved many milestones that we couldn't have achieved as a central bank on our own. But as we were journeying along, there was recognition that we had never undertaken a review of the PASA structure. And in this regard, initially, the call was for reviewing the governance of PASA to ensure that we make it more effective. And in this regard, colleagues are aware that this led to the engagement on bringing independence into council, and that resulted in Dr. Alvin Berger being appointed as the chairperson, and discussions ongoing relating to possible independent councillors. But we have now taken a firm decision of moving along the journey of ensuring that we review PASA, but then we didn't restrict it to governance, but looked at the overall effectiveness of PASA as a payment system management body recognized by the bank. But in this regard, within the SAB itself, we engaged on the broader view of reviewing the SRO model, or the payment system management body concept, vis-a-vis reviewing the effectiveness of PASA as an entity. And we wanted to undertake these two jointly, but decided to split them such that the broader review of the SRO model or the broader payments system management body concept will be something that will be undertaken in the medium to long term. There's work that will be undertaken in this regard because we wanted to address specific issues that related to the PASA organization itself. But the prompt generally of these reviews came from various developments that are facing us in the payment system environment, some being, for instance, the financial sector regulatory reforms, commonly known as the Twin Peaks reforms that we are almost heading towards finalizing with the probable enacting of the financial sector regulation bill, as well as the recently issued principles for financial market infrastructures that talks to focused oversight on FMIs and supervision of FMIs, and that results in the licensing dispensations that could actually emerge from there. And recently, as a jurisdiction, we were subjected to a financial sector assessment program by the IMF, which also had its own findings, and some of them had a reflection on PASA or a PASA-like structure. And we also engaged in our market on trying to get input as to aspects that could be improved in this PASA structure, while of course, as part of our oversight arrangements as the central bank, we also had ideas of things that can be re-looked at. But as I indicate, the broader SRO of payment system management body concept will be reviewed in the longish term, and probably we should be able to complete this with probable benchmark with what other jurisdictions are doing, while of course recognizing that this structure has served us well under the recognition of the central bank as we had recognized it. But then, just in reflection, colleagues will also recognize that as the central bank, we are responsible for the regulation, supervision, and oversight of the national payment system. But in this regard, although in some respects we don't have direct mandates, we are also confronted with aspects that we have to actually reflect on. Some of them that I can just indicate are relating to financial inclusion, consumer protection, competition, prevention of financial crime, as well as the financial integrity of the payment system. We don't have direct mandate on some of these aspects, but we have to address ourselves to them. And in this regard, as we actually discharge those responsibilities, a structure such as PASA will play a crucial role in ensuring that we realize our goals. There's been also all the time the reflection on interoperability that we require in the payment system. And these are some of the supporting aspects that we have to look at, including access to the payment system, for instance, the sustainability and the certainty that is created in that space, balance between innovation and regulation that we have to actually reflect upon. And in all these aspects that we'll be handling, we see PASA as an entity that would actually lend itself to support all these initiatives. Although I would not want to preempt the outcome of the broader SRO model review, I would actually not hasten to indicate that I believe a structure like PASA has got a role to play in the payment system environment, and whether it would be recognized in law or not, it would actually lend itself in a position where it can be an entity where the regulators can interact with and all other players in the market. But in this regard, I would want to echo, without preempting the outcome, of course, what Walter indicated, that we were in good stead by recognizing PASA in law, because then we work very closely as the regulator with the stakeholders in the market, while of course recognizing that as part of this review that we have undertaken, I'll just share some aspects of what is captured in the report that has been released recently. There's aspects that we can enhance such that we make PASA effective so that it serves our market. You are aware that last week we released the report. This was on the back of a survey that we had issued way back in 2015, followed by a consultative report that we issued around September 2015 that was shared with you, and we solicited input. We then revised the report, culminating in the one that was released last week, where we hope to start engaging with the PASA structures through the chairperson to work out a plan for the implementation of the recommendations that we have set ourselves. We see ourselves making this structure more effective and enhancing it going forward, and we recognize that it lends itself to actually assist the regulator in ensuring that industry projects are well coordinated and implemented. Yesterday there was mention of the AC project, for instance, and there's issues that we wanted to address by implementing an authenticated collections environment. And in this regard, we engaged through PASA with all the stakeholders in this environment. And there was issues that were raised on this stage yesterday relating to the model and the approach that we took in terms of, in some respects, I mean, we as the central bank had proposed that as part of that solution, we could go for a centralized database of mandates, but the players chose otherwise. But now it seems we have to reflect on some of these aspects to see that we address them such that the system can work to serve the market better. And we see PASA as one of the stakeholders that are playing a crucial role in organizing the players in that implementation.
Awesome, Tim. I couldn't have said that any further or better myself, sir. The continued collaboration goes on, ladies and gentlemen, and in recognition of those 20 years of great service and continuing service, may I just present our panel members with a small token of appreciation and also ask you to put your hands together and give them a round of applause.
Thank you. Thanks very much.